You're wasting money on your kids. My dad insisted your sister needs help more. I looked at my daughter's face and said, my family comes first. Now they're furious that I chose my kids over them. At 39 years old, I finally put an end to being my family's unlimited cash source after over a decade of financial exploitation. The breaking point came during a family gathering last month when my father coldly referred to my children as a waste of money. In that moment, something within me fractured, as if glass had shattered. I had achieved significant success establishing a cybersecurity company from nothing, a firm that now safeguards the data of top-tier corporations. However, that success carried an unspoken price. I never consented to becoming the financial crutch for a family that increasingly viewed me as nothing more than an endless supply of money. What unfolded after I cut off their dependency took me by surprise, yet I feel not even a shred of regret. During my childhood, we were comfortably in the middle class. My parents held reliable jobs. My sister Maria was treated as the golden child, and my brother Alex was the troubled one who always seemed to deserve another shot. A phrase was constantly repeated throughout our lives at birthdays, holidays, and graduations alike: family always supports family. I had embraced that philosophy wholeheartedly. When my tech company, Sentinel Security, started gaining traction 8 years ago, the monetary requests began. Initially, they seemed harmless. My father lost his job due to corporate downsizing and simply needed assistance covering the mortgage just for a few months. "Son, you know I'll pay you back," he assured me. My mother dismissed it as a minor setback, but months turned into half a year, and then into something permanent. Then came Maria's university tuition. She insisted on enrolling in an exclusive private college despite her average academic performance, and it was $220,000 per year. "It's an investment in her future," my mother argued, completely disregarding the fact that I had juggled multiple jobs just to afford a public university for myself. Alex's DUI followed, along with attorney costs, bail, and then a business endeavor involving custom motorcycles that burned through $30,000 before ultimately collapsing. "He just needs someone to believe in him," my father insisted while Alex nodded, undoubtedly formulating his next plan. Amanda, my wife, watched everything unfold with increasing concern. "They don't even show gratitude anymore, Ethan," she observed after yet another dinner where my parents casually mentioned expenses they assumed I would cover. "They act as if they're entitled to your money." For years, I brushed off worries. "Their family," I would say, as though that justified everything. Gradually, the disregard for my own family, Amanda and our children, Helen, 7, and Paul, 5, crept in like a slow-acting toxin. Maria rolled her eyes whenever we discussed our kids' private education. I refused to throw money away while Mom and Dad struggle. She would remark, "The same sister whose rent I paid religiously." Alex never acknowledged my children's birthdays but fully expected extravagant presents for himself. My parents ignored Paul's piano recital yet demanded I drop an important business engagement to bail Alex out once more. The final straw snapped on a humid Sunday night at my parents' house, a home whose mortgage I had been secretly paying for years. Helen had poured her heart into applying for a prestigious summer science program, and had earned acceptance. At just 8 years old, she already displayed the same enthusiasm for technology that had fueled my career. The program's cost was $2,500, a price I was more than willing to pay to support her growth. My father sneered, swirling the premium bourbon I had gifted him the previous week. $5,000 for summer camp. You're wasting money on those kids when your sister needs a new car. They're just going to be a financial burden anyway." The atmosphere seemed to tilt. I saw Amanda's face turn pale, and noticed Helen's small frame shrink as she pretended to concentrate on her dessert. Maria, still fixated on inspecting her freshly manicured nails, yet another indulgence I had funded, casually added, "By the way, my rent's due tomorrow. Don't forget to transfer the money. Oh, and I need an extra $1,000 this month for Coachella tickets." At that moment, something deep inside me snapped, loud and undeniable, like a rubber band stretched far beyond its limit until it finally breaks. At that instant, I could hear the thumping of my own pulse, the rush of blood pounding in my ears. The space around me seemed to shrink into a narrow tunnel. Slowly, I pushed myself up from my seat and made my way toward the wall where a framed family picture hung, the one I had funded from the high-end photographer to the coordinated attire to the expensive custom frame. I carefully took it down, examined it for a few lingering seconds, then flipped it face down on the table. "I'm finished," I said in a calm but firm tone. My mother barely acknowledged me, irritated that I had interrupted Maria's so-called housing emergency. "What nonsense are you saying, Ethan? I'm done acting as your personal cash supply. As of right now, all financial support is over, every last bit of it." For a brief moment, 3 seconds maybe, there was silence. Then laughter erupted around the room. "Yeah right," my father chuckled. "Now about Maria's car situation." "I'm not joking," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "The mortgage assistance, the credit cards, the constant loans that never get paid back, it all stops today." "Don't be absurd," my mother snapped. "You know your father didn't mean what he said." "Now regarding Maria's rent." I turned my gaze to Amanda, who offered me a small but supportive nod. Then I looked at my children, confused but in some way appearing relieved. 12 years, I said. "In 12 years, I have given you more than $500,000 and yet you still treat me and my family as if we're insignificant." As I left their laughter behind, I was convinced I wasn't serious. They were wrong. That night, I lay awake, unable to rest. At 3 a.m., I found myself seated in my home office, surrounded by a notepad, calculator, and 12 years of bank records. My hands shook as I sifted through the transactions, carefully listing every so-called loan, every supposed gift, and every expense I had covered. When I finished, the numbers stared back at me, undeniable evidence of how I had been used. Mortgage assistance, $90,000. Maria's costs, $110,000. Tuition, rent, car shopping, Alex's bailouts, $140,000. Legal issues, failed businesses, actual bail payments, parents' credit card debt, $45,000. Medical costs, $155,000. Vacations I paid for but was never invited to join, $20,000. Gifts, holidays, and last-minute emergencies, $30,000. Total, $450,000. Close to $1 million, money that could have secured my children's education, funds that could have expanded my business far earlier, resources that could have allowed Amanda to focus on her art without financial worries. Instead, it had vanished into an abyss of greed and entitlement. I printed the financial breakdown and taped it to my office wall, not as a reminder of what I had lost, but as proof of what I would never sacrifice again. The following morning, I took concrete steps. I met with my financial planner to officially document all money given and loans. I terminated every automatic payment tied to my family, revoked their access to my credit cards, and updated passwords across all financial accounts. I installed an advanced security system at both my home and office, fully aware that their response wouldn't be reasonable. I also consulted my company's legal counsel regarding potential harassment. Then, I blocked their phone numbers, filtered their emails into an unseen folder, and locked down all social media accounts. That night, as the magnitude of my decision settled over me, Amanda held me close as I trembled. "They're going to despise me," I whispered. "They've been exploiting you for years," she replied softly. "You just couldn't see it because you're a good person." "They're not." By 7 a.m. the next morning, the messages started arriving, sent to my assistant's phone since mine had them blocked. "Haha, very funny. Send my rent money immediately. Maria, stop being childish and call your mother. She's upset, Dad." By noon, the voicemails started coming, forwarded by my increasingly uncomfortable assistant. "You think you're better than us? You'd be nothing without this family." My father, his voice slurred despite the early morning hour, said, "My landlord is threatening eviction. Are you really going to let your sister end up homeless?" Maria, predictably dramatic, said, "Bro, I get it you're mad, but I need that investor cash by Friday or these guys will literally break my legs. Alex, apparently caught up in yet another disastrous business scheme, I ignored every message. Their safety net was gone. 72 hours passed and the messages escalated from anxious to downright desperate, then shifted into outright pleading. My mother sent a detailed email explaining that my father's blood pressure had skyrocketed, that he had been awake all night consumed by fear over potentially losing their house. How could I do this to the man who had given up everything to raise me? Alex tried a different strategy, arriving at my workplace wearing a neck brace, claiming he had been assaulted by furious investors and needed $25,000 to cover medical expenses. When security removed him from the premises, he began yelling that I was abandoning my own brother and leaving him to suffer. Maria approached things in yet another way by reaching out to Amanda directly over the phone. She sobbed about her looming eviction, insisting she would end up homeless because her own brother didn't love her enough to help. When Amanda gently suggested that Maria consider getting a roommate or taking on an extra job, her tears vanished instantly. "You've turned him against us," she spat venomously before slamming the call. Then came their last-ditch effort, a staged family intervention. One evening, I arrived home to find my parents' vehicle parked outside. Inside, Amanda sat tensely on the couch, Maria beside her, Alex pacing near the fireplace, while my parents sat stiffly, their expressions solemn as if they were attending a wake. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already knew exactly what was happening. "We're deeply concerned about you, son," my father said, his tone thick with careful manufactured worry. "This isn't like you, distancing yourself from your family, ignoring our messages. We're afraid something is seriously wrong." My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "We spoke with Dr. Simmons," she added, referring to our longtime family doctor. "He believes you might be experiencing a nervous breakdown due to work stress or possibly even early onset dementia. The paranoia about finances, the abrupt personality shift." I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it. They were actually trying to manipulate me into questioning my own sanity just because I had set a limit. "Let me get this straight," I said, setting my briefcase down. "You all believe I'm having a psychological crisis simply because I stopped handing you money." "This isn't about the money," Maria wailed. "Right on cue, it's about how much you've changed," Alex interjected. "You've never been this selfish before." "We've discussed this among ourselves," my father continued, leaning in slightly. "We think it would be best if you spoke to a professional, got some help. And while you do that, your mother and I can oversee your finances just for the time being to ease your burden." And there it was, the real reason behind their supposed concern: they wanted access to my accounts. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and returned to the living room. "You all need to leave right now," I said. "See?" Maria whispered dramatically. To Amanda. "This irrational anger, this isn't the brother I grew up with." Amanda stood, her patience clearly worn thin. "I've heard enough. Ethan is completely fine. The only thing that's changed is that he's finally recognized how you've all been using him. Now get out of our home." The pretense of worry on my father's face slipped away. "You don't get to speak to us like that," he said sharply. "We're his parents and I'm his wife," Amanda countered, "the one who has watched him work himself to the bone to support all of you, only to be treated like a walking bank account. Leave now, or I'll call the police for trespassing." They had no choice but to leave, but just before stepping out the door, my father leaned in close and whispered, "You'll regret this, son. No one turns their back on their family without consequences." It was a threat, plain and simple, and they made sure to follow through. The retaliation started the very next day. My father stormed into my office, creating a disturbance in the lobby until security had to physically remove him. My mother reached out to Amanda's parents, spinning a dramatic story about how I was having a complete mental collapse, selfishly withholding money that was needed for life-saving medication and critical care. Maria launched a campaign of whispers, feeding mutual friends lies about me, telling them I was abusive toward my wife and children, hoarding money while my so-called starving family suffered. Alex escalated things further. He contacted my business clients, dropping vague insinuations about fraudulent activity. He showed up at my kids' school, fabricating a supposed emergency. He even went so far as to submit a false police report claiming that I had made violent threats against him. At one time, their manipulation would have worked. I would have given them whatever they wanted just to put an end to the chaos. Not this time. A fortnight passed and the weight of reality started to settle upon them. Maria found herself thrown out of her upscale apartment, her luxury car repossessed, while she furiously berated the tow truck operator, insisting that her brother would take legal action against them all. Alex's latest associates realized he lacked the funds he had guaranteed, which resulted in him sporting a bruised lip and receiving a stern warning. My parents received a notice of foreclosure. The mortgage had remained unpaid for 2 full months before I severed financial ties. Desperation drove them to more extreme measures. My father attempted to secure a loan using my personal details, an obvious case of identity fraud that caught the attention of the authorities. My mother reached out to every extended family member, weaving a dramatic narrative about how I was allegedly struggling with substance abuse and reckless gambling. Maria moved back in with my parents, painting herself as a tragic figure on social media, claiming she had been forced to give up her career to care for our elderly parents. Meanwhile, I was experiencing a level of peace I hadn't known in years. I finally slept through the night without disturbance. The constant headaches that had plagued me vanished completely. I was present at every one of Helen's school performances and attended all of Paul's soccer matches without my phone constantly vibrating with supposed family emergencies. Without the strain of supporting 5 grown adults, our household's finances flourished. We bolstered our retirement savings, significantly increased contributions to our children's college funds, and finally embarked on a long overdue family trip, our first in years. At work, freed from endless disruptions, I secured 3 major corporate deals we had been pursuing for months. I also began therapy, untangling the deep-rooted guilt and manipulation that had shaped my relationships with my family. I was ensnared in a textbook cycle of financial exploitation, my therapist explained. My success became something they felt entitled to. For months after I severed ties, my father suffered a heart attack. Unlike the fabricated medical crises of the past, this one was genuine, caused by years of heavy drinking and chronic stress. My mother left me a voicemail from the hospital, her voice breaking with emotion. "He's asking for you," she pleaded. "If you have any love for your father, please come." I arranged for flowers to be sent and made sure the medical expenses were settled anonymously, but I did not visit. The person I used to be would have rushed to his bedside, wallet in hand. The version of me that now existed saw through the manipulation. Even in a moment of genuine need, my father recovered, but the knowledge that I had covered his expenses without actually re-engaging with him angered him more than if I had done nothing at all. It proved that I still had the means to assist, but I was deliberately choosing not to provide them with an open-ended financial lifeline. The real confrontation took place 6 months after I had gone no contact. I was having lunch with a prospective business partner when my family entered the restaurant, all 4 of them. This was no accident, they had been tracking my whereabouts, waiting for the ideal moment. They looked different. My father had lost weight, his tailored suit replaced with cheap off-the-rack clothing. My mother's high-end salon dye job had grown out, revealing her natural hair color. Maria clutched a counterfeit version of the designer purse I had gifted her the Christmas before. Alex had a faintly discolored bruise beneath one eye. Noticing my sudden change in demeanor, my client asked, "Is everything all right?" Before I could respond, my family encircled the table. "We need to talk," my father declared, trying to sound authoritative, though his voice betrayed a hint of desperation. "This is a private family matter." Remaining seated, I responded, "I'm in the middle of a business meeting. This is neither the time nor the place." "It's not the time," my mother spat. "Was it the right time to turn your back on the very people who made sacrifices for you?" The restaurant grew quiet. Other patrons pretended not to be paying attention, though their interest was evident. My client looked distinctly uneasy. I exhaled, my voice steady but firm. And exactly what sacrifices have you made for me, aside from constantly taking until there was nothing left to give? We raised you, my father roared, his volume rising. We gave up everything for you. And I repaid that sacrifice 100 times over, I replied, my voice unwavering. But somehow, that was never enough. Maria stepped forward, her eyes glistening with strategically timed tears. My car was taken away. I was forced to move back home. My entire life is in ruins because of you. Your current situation is the direct result of your own decisions, I answered calmly, just as mine is the product of the choices I've made. Alex, always the most impulsive, swatted a water glass off the table, sending it crashing onto the floor. You really think you're better than us, he sneered. Without this family, you'd be nothing. Slowly, I rose from my seat, my gaze locked onto his. That's where you're wrong, I said. I became successful not because of this family, but in spite of it. That's when my father played his final card, the argument that had always worked in the past. Family is family, he declared. You have an obligation to us. We share the same blood. I examined each of them, people connected to me by blood but not by morals. Individuals who spoke of affection but thrived on taking advantage. For so long, I had convinced myself that being related meant I owed them something. Now, I saw reality clearly. My duty is to my spouse, who stands by my side without exploiting me, to my children, whom I am teaching that love does not come with a price tag. That is my true family. As for the rest of you, you're merely kin by birth, nothing more. I placed enough cash on the table to settle our unfinished meal, apologized to my business associate, and exited. They chased after me into the parking lot, flinging insults and warnings that rolled off my back like water on a raincoat. As I pulled away, I caught sight of them in my rearview mirror, huddled together, already squabbling over whose fault it was, who would cover the check, and who they could latch onto next. For the first time, I felt something unexpected, sympathy. It has now been exactly 12 months since I severed all financial ties. The aftermath played out just as expected. My parents lost their house and were forced to downsize into a modest apartment, where they now have to earn a living to sustain themselves. Maria eventually secured employment, one that matched her actual experience rather than her imagined worth, selling retail products instead of holding a high-powered fashion role. Alex ended up spending a month behind bars after attempting to deceive an elderly investor, a harsh reality check that may be the first true consequence he has ever encountered. As for me, Sentinel Security was recently appraised at a valuation of $40 million, and we are in the process of launching a second office. Helen's science experiment won first place at the state-level competition. Paul has now taken up learning guitar in addition to playing piano. Amanda and I are finally planning the second honeymoon we could never afford back when my family drained every last dollar we had. Just a week ago, an email from my mother bypassed my filters. We are your family, she wrote. Families forgive. When will you stop punishing us? I didn't answer, there was nothing to say. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about accountability. For the first time in their adult lives, my family members were facing the natural results of their own behavior. Occasionally, I wonder if they will ever fully understand what they truly lost, not just my financial assistance, but the relationship with a son who would have given them everything if only they had valued him for who he was instead of for what he could provide. If they had treated his wife and children with the smallest amount of courtesy, if they had ever uttered the words, "thank you," instead of constantly demanding more. They say familial bonds are stronger than anything, but at a certain point, you have to recognize when those same bonds are suffocating you. Walking away was never just about finance, it was about rescuing myself, my marriage, and my children from an endless cycle of exploitation. They labeled me heartless. The truth is, I finally found the strength to devote my heart to those who actually deserved it, and I have never been more